Number 3. Never mandate on the conscience of any believer what is demanded only once in Scripture. Never mandate on the conscience of any believer what is mandated only once in Scripture. Someone says, but Don, how many times has God got to say something for it to be true? Well, I would say God doesn't have to say it at all for it to be true. It either is true or it isn't, which shows I'm not entirely in sympathy with deconstruction, but we'll let that pass. But on the other hand, God may have to say it quite a number of times and in different ways for us to know just what He means. Partly because we're dumb, partly because we're sinful, partly because we're crossing cultures and languages, and we may misconstrue something. So therefore, even if I think I know what it means, I should not lay it on the whole church as something that is mandated for everybody when it is only found once. Let me give some examples. What does baptism for the dead mean in 1 Corinthians 15? Well, if you're a Mormon, you know what it means. You, in addition to the Bible, you have the Book of Mormon and Divine Law and Covenants and other holy writings, and you've interpreted it a certain way to mean that people can be baptized for the dead, quite literally, by proxy baptism. Mormons believe that you can save them, save the dead, by getting their names and having living people baptized by proxy for them. That's what baptism for the dead means. That's why they're some of the world's best experts on genealogies, because they keep looking up names and names and names and names and names, because when you're baptized for the dead, it can't be sort of done generically. I hereby want to be baptized for my great-great-great-great-great-great-great to the 30th power uncle or something. You've got to put a name in the slot somewhere. Now, I'm not convinced that's the right interpretation of 1 Corinthians 15. In fact, in 1950-51, there were 3 articles written in Catholic Biblical Quarterly that detailed 41 different interpretations of that verse in the history of the Church. In my own mind, I've narrowed it down to 2, but I'm not quite convinced about either of them. And at the end of the day, if you push me, I have to say I'm not sure. I don't know. So I refuse to make that binding on anybody's conscience. Now that is exactly how I would respond to the foot washing passage. The Lord's Supper crops up several times. It crops up in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's at least alluded to in John. It crops up in 1 Corinthians 11 explicitly, and it's alluded to many other times besides that. It's described on occasion in Acts. Where do you find the foot washing? John 13. That's it. Full stop. Besides, despite the fact that Jesus formally says, so you also ought to wash one another's feet, I am persuaded myself in the context that he is not establishing a rite that is ongoing, but is giving a principle of forbearing humility. And in the context, the foot washing rite has some symbolism to do with the atonement that I shan't go into here. But from my perspective, I cannot in conscience lay foot washing on as a rite in the church that is binding. If somebody wants to practice it, I'm not upset. I'm only upset if somebody tries to mandate it on the conscience of all believers. Let me try one more. This one may push a little closer to home. I mean, it's all right to talk about these people who have foot washing rites in their churches when none of us does, isn't it? So we'll take one where some of us do. What about the distinction between teaching and ruling elders? Much loved in some branches of Presbyterianism. At the end of the day, that distinction textually is based on one verse. 1 Timothy 5:17. And on this basis, some branches of the Christian church make a pretty sharp distinction between teaching elders and ruling elders, even so far as the qualifications for the respective offices are concerned. Well, I have no objection if people do that on pragmatic grounds. For myself, I'm a little nervous. It seems to me that every time elders, pastors, overseers are introduced, the same cycle of qualifications recurs, and in every case, teaching authority crops up. I'm not sure that a ruling elder, an administering elder, is someone who can't teach, but is a first-class administrator. That's a peculiarly modern, Western, post-industrial notion. For in the ancient church, authority, ruling, was done precisely through the Word. It wasn't done in the first instance through a computer program. But some elders were more gifted in the entailments of this in ruling, I suspect, and some less so, and a pragmatic distinction exists there in 517. I doubt that there is sufficient warrant on the basis of one verse alone, however, to make an entirely separate division of ecclesiastical officers. My Presbyterian friends will doubtless correct me afterwards.